Somewhere on a hillside in the Ozarks right now, a race is underway. Not a race between animals, a race between plants and light. Every spring, before the oaks and hickories and sugar maples have opened a single leaf, the Ozark forest floor transforms. What was bare brown leaf litter just weeks ago becomes a tapestry of pink, white, purple, and yellow. These are the spring ephemerals, and they are, without exaggeration, one of the most ecologically remarkable stories in North American botany. I'm Dakota, and in today's lecture, for Module 2 of our Ozark Ecology series, we're going to understand what spring ephemerals are, why they do what they do, and who the key players are in the Ozarks, and what role they play in the broader forest community. By the end of the video, you'll never look at March or April forests the same way, so let's go. And let's start with the definition, because the word ephemeral is doing a lot of work here. Ephemeral comes from the Greek word for lasting only a day. In botany, we use it a little bit more loosely. Spring ephemerals are herbaceous plants, meaning they have no woody stems, that complete their entire above-ground life cycle in just a few weeks each spring. We're talking about plants that emerge from cold ground in February or March, unfurl their leaves, flower, get pollinated, produce seeds, and then, poof, retreat back underground, sometimes in as little as 3 to 6 weeks. By Memorial Day, you could walk through a forest that was covered in bloodroot blooms in March and find absolutely no trace they were ever there. They spend the other 10 months of the year as underground storage organs. Bulbs, corms, rhizomes, fleshy root stems, packed with the energy reserves they need to fuel the next year's sprint. Now, not every early spring wildflower is technically considered a true ephemeral. Some, like wild ginger or jack-in-the-pulpit, keep their leaves visible for much of the summer. Ecologists sometimes call these spring active rather than spring ephemeral. But in common usage and for our purposes today, we'll cover all the iconic early spring forest floor wildflowers of the Ozarks, whether their leaves linger or not, and I'll flag the distinction as we go. So why this bizarre strategy? Why would a plant evolve to grow and reproduce only in a narrow window and then disappear? The answer is light. Specifically, the light that hits a forest floor before the tree canopy leaps out. In a mature deciduous forest, exactly the kind that dominates the Ozarks, the summer canopy blocks 90 to 98% of incoming sunlight. The forest floor in July is a very dim place. Most plants simply cannot photosynthesize enough to survive there. But in early spring, before the leaves emerge, that same forest floor receives full or nearly full sunlight. For a brief period, often just 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the year and latitude, the forest floor is actually one of the sunniest places in the ecosystem. Spring ephemerals have exploited this light window with extraordinary precision. They're phenologically tuned, meaning their internal timing systems have evolved to take advantage of this specific ecological moment. They detect the combination of warming soil temperatures and lengthening days, and they mobilize. Their growth in early spring is explosive, fueled by those underground energy reserves. precisely because they need to get their leaves up and photosynthesizing before the window closes. Here's the trade-off, and it's worth appreciating. Growing in early spring means cold temperatures, potential late frosts, and few pollinators. These plants have had to solve all those problems. Bloodroot can survive a hard frost in full bloom. Hepatica produces flowers before leaves entirely, betting that early emerging queen bumblebees will find it. Spring Beauty has a remarkably low temperature threshold for photosynthesis. It can operate at near freezing temperatures. This strategy isn't just clever, it's ancient. Spring ephemerals as a functional group evolved in the deciduous forests of the northern hemisphere over millions of years, and the Ozark Plateau, with its deep, unglaciated soils and mature upland forests, is one of their great refuges. We have exceptional diversity here compared to most of the central United States. All right, let's meet the cast. I'm going to walk you through 12 species you're very likely to encounter in the Ozarks. I'll give you the key identification features, the habitat preferences, and one or two ecological facts that make each one worth knowing. Bloodroot is the icon. If there's one spring ephemeral that most people associate with the Ozarks, it's this one. Those large, solitary white flowers with their yellow centers appear on rich, north-facing slopes and along stream banks, often in extraordinary numbers. The name comes from the striking orange-red sap in the rhizome. It was used as dye by indigenous peoples and has real antimicrobial properties. In early spring, you'll often see the flower bud cradled inside the still unfurled leaf, like a baby in a blanket. Bloom time in the Ozarks? Late February to mid-March, depending on elevation. Hepatica is among the first wildflowers to bloom, sometimes poking up through snow in late January. Unlike most spring ephemerals, it flowers before it produces new leaves. The flowers range from white to pale lavender to blue, and they have fuzzy hairy stems that serve as insulation. Look for it on rocky slopes with well-drained soils, often in association with oaks and blueberries. The trilobed leaves that emerge after flowering look liver-shaped, hence the old folk name, liverleaf, and the genus name from the Greek for liver. Spring Beauty is abundance itself. This is the species that creates the great white carpets you see in low woods, floodplain edges, and disturbed forest in March and April. Look for the narrow, almost grass-like leaves and the small, five-petaled flowers, white to pale pink with darker pink veins. Ecologically, Spring Beauty is a crucial early nectar source for bees emerging from overwintering, especially small native bees in the genus Andrena that are specialists on this plant. Its small underground corm was used as food by many indigenous nations. It tastes something like a sweet water chestnut. Trout lily is one of those plants that rewards patience. The mottled leaves, browning green, look like a brook trout's flank. They often carpet the ground in large colonies, but only a small fraction of plants actually flower in any given year. Most are non-flowering juveniles that spend years or decades just building up energy reserves. The nodding yellow flower bends downward, which is a tip-off. This plant relies primarily on ants for seed dispersal, and the flower position may help direct seeds toward the ground. We'll talk more about ants and seed dispersal in a few minutes. Trilliums are the architecture of the spring forest floor. Everything comes in threes. 3 leaves, 3 sepals, 3 petals. Large-flowered trillium is the showiest, big white blooms that age to pink, and it favors rich, moist, north-facing slopes in the Ozarks. Toadshade trillium, Trillium sisal, is often more common in our region. Its flower sits directly on the leaves with no stem, and the deep burgundy-brown petals smell faintly of carrion, attracting fly pollinators rather than bees. If you see trillium with heavily mottled leaves and a stalkless flower, that's your toadshade. Here's an important ecological note. Trilliums are slow-growing perennials that can live for 25 years or more. Picking the flower kills the plant, or at minimum, sets it back by years. Please observe, but do not pick. Virginia bluebells is the Ozarks' most spectacular floodplain wildflower. Look for it on moist, rich river terraces and lowland woods. It can form spectacular colonies that turn entire hillsides blue in April. The flower buds start pink and turn blue as they open, a color change that signals to pollinators. Long-tongued bumblebees and sphinx moths are the primary pollinators. Virginia bluebells is a true ephemeral. By June, you will find no trace above ground. If any wildflower looks designed by a cartoonist, it's Dutchman's breeches. The flowers look exactly like tiny white pantaloons hanging upside down on a clothesline. The finely dissected blue-green foliage is also distinctive. This is a specialist plant. Only long-tongued bees, primarily queen bumblebees, have tongues long enough to reach the nectar at the tips of those inflated spurs. Shorter-tongued bees sometimes rob the nectar by biting through the spur from the outside. Look for it on rich, rocky slopes alongside bloodroot. Toothwort is often overlooked because it's more modest than its neighbors, but it's ecologically important. It's in the mustard family, which means 4 petals in a cross pattern. The common name refers to the tooth-like projections on the underground rhizome. Toothwort is the larval host plant for the West Virginia white butterfly, a species that depends almost entirely on plants in this genus. The butterfly is timed to emerge in synchrony with the toothwort bloom. Without toothwort on the forest floor, no West Virginia white. Wild ginger hides its flower. While most spring wildflowers wave their blooms in the air, wild ginger produces a curious brownish-purple 3-lobed flower right at the ground surface, often hidden under the leaves. This is thought to be an adaptation for pollination by early emerging ground-level insects like fungus gnats and small beetles that might be looking for overwintering leaf litter or decomposing matter. The flower mimics the look and smell of decaying organic material. While ginger is technically not a true ephemeral, its large, velvety, heart-shaped leaves persist into summer. But it's very much a spring active plant, and its leaves are unmistakable once you know them. The rhizome has a strong ginger aroma, though it's not related to culinary ginger. Jack in the Pulpit is one of the Ozarks' most architecturally interesting spring plants. The pulpit is technically a spathe, a hood-like modified leaf that arches over the jack, which is the spandex, a central spike bearing tiny flowers at its base. This plant has an unusual reproductive biology. It changes sex. Younger small plants typically produce only male flowers. As the plant grows larger and accumulates more energy reserves, it switches to producing female flowers, which require more resources to produce the bright red berries that follow in late summer. A caution: all parts of Jacana pulpit contain calcium oxalate crystals that cause intense burning if eaten raw. The berries are attractive but highly irritating. Mayapple is the forest floor's umbrella plant. Those large, deeply lobed leaves can carpet whole areas of rich bottomland forest in April. Each stem either has one leaf that's going to be a non-flowering plant, or splits into two leaves, with a single white flower hidden in the fourth between them. The fruit, the mayapple itself, ripens in June and July and is edible when fully yellow and soft. It's been described as tasting like a tropical fruit, something between a lemon and a mango. But all other parts of the plant, leaves, roots, unripe fruit, are highly toxic. Mayapple contains podophyllitoxin, a compound that's actually used in modern medicine to treat certain cancers. Our final species is the most specialized, twinleaf, named for Thomas Jefferson by the botanist Benjamin Barton, is uncommon but spectacular when you find it. The leaves are deeply divided into two equal lobes, making them look like a pair of wings or lungs. Twinleaf favors rich alkaline soils over limestone, which in the Ozarks means look to valley bottoms with limestone outcrops, particularly in the White River Hills country of Missouri and Arkansas. The flowers last only a day or two, making timing critical. Understanding individual species is only half the picture. What makes spring ephemerals truly fascinating is their role in the broader forest ecosystem, and especially two ecological stories: pollinators and ants. Spring ephemerals are critically important early season resources for pollinators, particularly native bees. Queen bumblebees emerge from hibernation in late winter and early spring. They're cold and thin. They need nectar to generate body heat and pollen to begin producing worker bees. If the spring forest floor offers nothing, bumblebee colonies may fail before they even get started. Spring beauty, bloodroot, trout lily, and hepatica are all documented heavily used by early bumblebees. Several specialist bee species in the genus Adrena are oligolegious, meaning they collect pollen almost exclusively from spring ephemerals. Claytonia mining bee, for example, depends almost entirely on spring beauty pollen to feed its larvae. Now for one of the most astonishing ecological stories in the spring forest: Myrmecory. That's from the Greek for ant dispersal. Many spring ephemerals, including bloodroot, trilliums, trout lily, Dutchman's breeches, hepatica, wild ginger, twinleaf, and toothwort, produce seeds with a special fatty appendage called an eliosome. The eliosome is nutritious. It's rich in lipids and amino acids. Ants love it. Ants in the genus Aphenogaster, sometimes called seed harvester ants, are the primary Myrmecoris dispersers in Ozark forests. They find the seeds, pick them up, carry them back to their underground nest, often 30 to 60 feet from the parent plant, eat the eliosome, and discard the intact seed in a refuse chamber of the nest. That refuse chamber turns out to be an excellent germination site, warm, humid, protected from frost, and fertilized by organic debris. The seed essentially gets a free ride to a high-quality microsite. In return, the ant gets a nutritious meal. Classic mutualism. This partnership shapes the spatial distribution of spring ephemerals across the landscape. Bloodroot colonies don't spread randomly. They spread in the direction of ant foraging trails. If you see a patch of bloodroot appearing 40 feet from a previous patch in a seemingly improbable spot, an ant almost certainly put it there. And here's the conservation twist. The system is vulnerable. Invasive ants, particularly Argentine ant and red imported fire ant, are expanding into Ozark forest edges. These invasive species either ignore the elaiosomes or don't cache seeds underground. Research suggests that in areas where invasive ants have displaced a phenogaster, spring ephemeral populations are declining, spreading more slowly and becoming genetically isolated. Phenology is the study of cyclic biological events and their relationship to climate, when things happen in nature, and how that timing shifts. Spring ephemerals are extraordinarily precise phenological markers. In the Ozarks, you can roughly use their bloom sequence as a seasonal calendar, and you'll find this seasonal calendar in our herbal database in Module 2. And you'll find these timings shift by 1 to 3 weeks, depending on elevation, slope aspect, and the specific year's weather. South-facing slopes warm first. North-facing hollows and stream corridors bloom later. This elevational and topographic variation extends your window to see wildflowers. If you miss the peak on a south-facing hillside, hike into a north-facing hollow, and you may still catch it. Climate change is shifting these dates earlier. Phenological research in eastern deciduous forests show that spring ephemeral bloom dates have advanced by 2 to 8 days per decade since the mid-20th century. The risk is mismatch. If the wildflowers bloom before their specialist pollinators have warmed up enough to emerge, or if tree leaf out advances faster than wildflower bloom, the carefully calibrated relationships that we've been discussing come under stress. Okay, so if you want to go see these plants, here is your practical field guide. The habitat types to target are rich, mesic, north-facing slopes with deep leaf litter. Those are the gold standard for most Ozark spring ephemerals. These sites have the moisture retention and soil depth that underground storage organs need. Look for indicator tree species like sugar maple, American elm, basswood, and Ohio buckeye. They signal the rich soils that ephemerals love. Also, stream corridors and floodplain terraces are where you'll find Virginia bluebells and large mayapple colonies. Rocky, drier slopes with oaks and blueberries are hepatica and bloodroot territory. Limestone valley bottoms in the White River Hills region are your best bet for twin leaf. Here are some practical tips for you. First of all, check iNaturalist observations from previous years to find documented sites near you. Filter by species and date range. Also, morning is best for photography. Dew on flowers, better light. Late afternoons better for observing bee activity. Wear waterproof boots. These plants favor wet soils and stream margins. Stay on trail or established paths, very important. Spring ephemeral soils are fragile. Compaction from foot traffic can permanently damage populations. Record your observations on iNaturalist. You'll be contributing to the phenological research and help track population trends. Never pick, dig, or transplant. Many of these species are sold by unscrupulous nurseries as wild collected, which means poached from the forest. Buy only nursery-propagated plants from reputable native plant nurseries. And that brings us to conservation and how you can help. Spring ephemerals face a suite of interconnected threats, and understanding them is part of being a literate Ozark ecologist. Deer browse is significant. White-tailed deer populations are far higher than historic levels across most of the Ozarks, and deer preferentially browse spring ephemerals, especially trilliums, bloodroot, and mayapple. In areas with high deer pressure, wildflower diversity drops sharply. Some researchers have called deer the single greatest threat to spring ephemeral diversity in the eastern deciduous forest. Invasive plants are a compounding threat. Garlic mustard is a particular villain. It releases chemicals into the soil that disrupt the mycorrhizal fungi that many spring ephemerals depend on. It shades the forest floor earlier in spring than the native vegetation would, and it outcompetes the native understory aggressively. If you see garlic mustard in your local forest, pull it early in spring before it sets seed. Collecting and poaching remain real problems. Bloodroot rhizomes, trilliums, and wild ginseng are all targeted. If you see anyone digging native plants in a public forest, that's illegal and should be reported to state natural resource agencies. On the hopeful side, forest conservation works. Protected forests and state natural areas in the Ozarks, places like Hercules Glades, Devil's Den, and the Buffalo National River Corridor, support some of the most spectacular spring ephemeral displays remaining in the region. Supporting land conservation organizations and advocating for forest protection is direct action for spring wildflower conservation. The spring ephemeral phenomenon is one of those natural history stories that I think genuinely changes people's relationship with the forest. Once you know about it, every walk in the woods in late winter and early spring becomes a search for the first signs of the race. Who is up? What's in bloom? How far has the window opened? So to summarize what we covered today, spring ephemerals are plants that complete their above-ground life cycle in the brief light window before the deciduous forest canopy closes. They're extraordinarily specialized, cold-tolerant, pollinator-synchronized, and in many cases, dependent on ants for seed dispersal. The Ozarks is a center of diversity for this functional group, and they face real but addressable threats from deer, invasives, and collecting. For Module 2, your field assignment is to visit a local forest in late February, March, or April, depending on when you're watching this, and record at least 3 spring ephemeral species on iNaturalist. Links to the assignment and the species field guide are in the course.